Welcome to It's Your Ego, Stupid, a show lovingly intended for millions of spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people like you who may at times be led into ego stupidity, a lesser version of yourself and a lesser version of life. This show will give you a much deeper understanding of what ego is, what it's doing to your life, how it can weaken your human and spiritual wellness, and how you can heal in each of these areas if needed. It's Your Ego, Stupid will heighten your awareness of the intense link between your ego and spirit, your humanity and divinity, and the synergy that can lead to the best version of you and your life. Your host is Dr. Nick Martin, a licensed psychologist who has worked in the clinical, university, school, and private practice settings over the past 40 years, while serving as a therapist, diagnostician, educator, and consultant. Welcome again to It's Your Ego, Stupid. And now your host, Dr. Nick Martin.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Nick Martin, also known by some as Ego Man, due to my intense focus on ego and how it's impacting our lives, both humanly and spiritually. I want to thank you for listening to It's Your Ego, Stupid on OMTimes Radio. I hope you've had a great week as you go about meeting the many important challenges that we all face, which during today's show will have us looking at how higher ego power contributes to difficulty interacting with people in healthy ways, how their intense needs for power, control, and influence can often filter into the way they interact with people in general, not just family and friends. These are the kinds of interactions that may take place in a school or work setting, whether we are at play or in recreational contexts, social occasions that can involve a gathering or a party, and general public settings like stores and sporting events. These are the places that often involve dealing with acquaintances and strangers, who are the people we most often encounter in our life. Our success in connecting with people in these broader social contexts has important implications for our social, emotional, and spiritual growth. It's this growth that allows us to experience a sense of peace and love for all people, regardless of their background, and whether we know them or not. Something that seems to be missing for many people. This is something that many people are having trouble doing, which is having a harmful effect on the quality of their lives, and often the lives of the people they live with, often bringing their social difficulties home with them. Failure to cultivate one's social growth and ability to get along with people often sets the stage for mental health, marital, sexual, drug and alcohol, legal, and work adjustment difficulties. And that's why I consider it to be one of the important life areas, that is, our ability to interact with people in healthy ways. I'll be looking at this difficulty within this and other programs that are focused specifically on a particular imbalanced ego energy and its impact on getting along with people, which again during today's show will have us look at how higher ego power affects one's ability to do so. But before we go more deeply into that focus, I want to mention that It's Your Ego, Stupid is a program for spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people, just like you and me, who may at times be led by our ego into something I call ego stupidity, a lesser version of ourselves, and again, a lesser version of life. Ego stupidity rooted in ego energy, affecting relationships with our family, friends, and co-workers, even with ourselves, that could stand some improvement, often a lot of improvement. Ego stupidity rooted in ego energy impacting our efforts to achieve, to use our potential, to recognize the service in what we are doing, whatever that is, and being able to experience a sense of meaning connected to our life's work. Ego stupidity, affecting our ability to deal effectively with all of the changes, adversity, stressors, and conflicts taking place in our life that often lead to their managing us rather than our managing them. Ego stupidity making it difficult to grow our mind with truth, while keeping us stuck in faulty beliefs, values, attitudes, and prejudices, with many of them acquired nowadays from unfiltered social media, fake news on the internet, and opinion news on TV that is masquerading as truth, and often suggesting that truth doesn't matter anymore, leading many to avoid inconvenient truths. These are truths that we need to hear, even though we may not want to hear them. Ego stupidity making it difficult to feel genuine, lasting happiness, while often leading us into unnecessary anxiety, anger, guilt, sadness, or fake happiness being substituted for the real thing. And finally, ego stupidity impacting our spiritual wellness and ability to be the love, life, and energy God is in our daily thoughts, words, and deeds. In short, impacting our ability to be our divinity in our daily life. As you can see, there are lots of important places that ego stupidity can make its appearance in our lives, the source of which is the nature of our ego energy. If things aren't going as well as you'd like in any of these areas, you've come to the right place, because a lot of what's going wrong has nothing to do with our intelligence, or the absence of spirituality, or the presence of mental instability. It has a lot more to do with our ego energy, serving as the fuel for ego stupidity. Your lives, relationships, and experiences have taught me all of that over the past 40 years, and what I'm sharing with you in my website, books, and shows about ego energy and ego stupidity, and how we can heal it with ego medicine when and where needed. Again, I want to thank you for tuning into It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio. During our show today, we're going to take a look at the impact that higher ego power has on the way a person gets along with people, particularly people they know less well, like acquaintances and strangers, the kinds of people we encounter most of the time in our life. As a quick reminder, people with higher ego power often like to be in control of situations. This is the person most likely to get voted off the island early in the TV game Survivor. Their needs to dominate situations, even when they did have better ideas, often rub people the wrong way, meaning their egos, and led people to wanting to get rid of them. They have limited tolerance for listening to people, the higher ego power person that is, because listening involves sharing what I refer to as thought control. For them, listening isn't necessary because they think they always have the better ideas, which is just an illusion. Where have you heard that? This often leads to healthy people, egoically speaking, wanting to keep their distance from them. Unfortunately, people with higher ego power have trouble reining themselves in and realizing when it's time to shut up, to stop talking, and start listening. They often think they're the smartest person in the room and that they need to show it. They have difficulty realizing when they are disrespecting or embarrassing people in the way they interact with them. They can feel entitled to express anger or act abusively towards people when those persons say or do something they believe is wrong. This is the person who the group would give the A-hole award to due to the way they treat people. Interestingly, this person would be completely blindsided to find out that this was the way people thought of them. This is a good example of ego blindness at work, how that energy blocks and clouds the perception of the reality taking place, particularly in dealing with people and working with people. They have no clue as to how their ego energy, their higher ego power energy, is coming through in their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how it's rubbing people the wrong way. We're going to be mentioning more of the symptoms and ego stupidity often occurring when they have difficulty interacting with people in healthy ways. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Well, there are millions of people who experience these very difficulties because there are over 8 billion people on the planet, and every one of them has an ego just like you and me. Some of these people are living in roles such as the dictator, the narcissist, and the bully that I talk about in my book, The Two Voices Within. I want you to take a look to see if you or a loved one is experiencing any of the symptoms, ego stupidity, and ego impact on spiritual wellness I'll be talking about today. I want you to diagnose you, because you're the only one living you, 24/7. Now we're going to take a look at some of the symptoms that indicate if a higher ego power voice, which is that mixture of your ego energy and your mind, is talking to and through you in your life when interacting with people. And here's the first symptom for people with higher ego power. You're not interested in listening to people. People with higher ego power are not very interested in listening to other people. They like to do a lot more of the talking than listening when meeting with people. For them, the person that's talking has the control, and they want to be that person, and they often are. Here are some questions for you to consider and whether this is happening to you or somebody that you know. Do you tend to dominate conversations? People with higher ego power have this pattern of wanting to control things, to dominate conversations, to say more than what others are maybe saying, to take up more of the talk time that may be going on within the conversation. Do you get irritated when people are trying to break into the conversation, meaning you think they're interrupting you and your ideas? Maybe you've been going on and on and on, but you still get angry or upset or irritated when they try to have something to say, and this bothers you. The difficulty you have is being able to share the focus, the time. Do you get irritated when you think people are going on too long? So when people are expressing their thoughts or their ideas, and you're having trouble with that, it's bothering you. They may not be going on very long, but for you it seems very long because it's violating your need to control the conversation or the social interaction taking place. So you may maximize the sense of they're talking too long or too much based upon your energy, your ego energy at work. And also, do you need to be the focal point of the conversation? People with higher ego power, often due to this sense of being superior in some respects, sometimes they think they're the smartest person in the room, believe that it's really about them and about what they have to say that matters the most. And so they try to be the focal point of the conversation. When you think of these different questions and the symptom, does any of this sound familiar to you? I'm going to go on to the next symptom. You think you can make people think what you're thinking. People with higher ego power often think that they can have other people think what they're thinking. In a way, they are expanding their perceived control over others to the point that they think that these ideas that they have can automatically become the ideas of another person. Well, This can be the case in some situations where you are surrounding yourself with yes people, which is something that people with higher ego power like to do, because yes people are people they can control. And so there is this notion that I can control people's thinking, not only the thinking of the yes people, but any person. And that's obviously not the case, but that's where the distorted that ego energy, when it's higher ego power, creates that ego blindness that feeds into this notion that I can make you think what I want you to think. Here are some questions that connect with that symptom. Do you try to force your ideas and opinions onto others? Do you try to force your ideas and opinions onto others? There's that over-empowerment, need to control other person's thing taking place, and there's this intense desire to make other people think what the higher ego power person is thinking. Also, do you find yourself saying trust me or believe me in order to get through to people? People with higher ego power often, when they're really trying to push people into thinking what they're thinking, may start to say trust me or believe me, and they say it fairly often. It's just part of one of their techniques to try to make people think what they're thinking. Trust me or believe me. And they say it a lot. And also, do you have trouble ending the conversation if people aren't agreeing with you? Do you have trouble ending the conversation, allowing the conversation to end when people aren't agreeing with you? People with higher ego power feel in a way that they have failed if conversation ends with people not agreeing with their ideas and their opinions, and so they prolong, if they can, the conversation to get people to start to think what they want them to think. When you think of these different questions and the things I've shared with you, as well as the symptoms, does any of this sound familiar to you? We're going to go on to one more symptom before we take our first break. And this symptom is that you gravitate to yes people as friends and acquaintances. People with higher ego power like to surround themselves with yes people as friends or acquaintances. These are the kind of people who are willing to agree with you on just about anything. And in a way, these people can often be privately disagreeing but publicly agreeing with you. But you don't know that. And these are people, these yes people that I talk about, are often getting something out of agreeing with you. So you're taking control over their thoughts or perceived control over their thoughts. They're receiving something in exchange for being more connected to you than maybe other people are. So people with higher ego power, they recruit over time people who are willing to agree and support them, particularly their needs for control. In a way, they're almost like groupies, that hang on and want to be connected to this person. Sometimes if they have a lot of talent or ability, maybe they're an athlete or they're an artist or they're a politician, people just connect up with them because they enjoy some of the benefits of that connection. So here are some questions for you to consider. Do you point to these people as affirmation for your ideas and opinions? That is, if you're this higher ego power, you point to these yes people as indications of how right you are about what you think and believe, and that other people should come around to it. Also, do you get angry when any of these yes people disagree with you? Meaning that maybe somebody speaks up and they're saying they don't agree with you about something, and that upsets you because you're losing control over them. And that's what's happening in that situation. And also, do you feel these people, these yes people, owe you control over them because of who you are? Again, if you're somebody that is famous, or you're an artist or an athlete or a politician or somebody of some renown, you think you have they owe you the control that you have over them. When you think about these different questions and the symptom, does any of this sound familiar to you? We're coming up on our first break. When we return, we'll be looking at some reflections of ego stupidity connected to people with higher ego power and the way they go about interacting with people. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the Internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, Dr. Nick Martin here. I want to invite you to visit my website, egoandspirit.info, where you can find lots of information on ego and download your free ebook copy of It's Your Ego Stupid. Fix it to fix your life. Also, please visit the shop page where you can find each of my other books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, and The Two Voices Within.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at reflections of ego stupidity and when it's happening in a higher ego power person's difficulties in healthily interacting with people. Some of these may seem odd or unusual or strange or inappropriate, but that's because you're not living in that energy. But for those with higher ego power, it's often leading them to engage in ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are affecting their ability to interact with people due to their higher level of ego power. It can often lead them to conclude that the abnormal things that they think, feel, or do are normal when dealing with people, in often inappropriate ways. And like the symptoms, they can become their abnormal normal that they don't realize they're caught up in. But others often can because they're not looking at them through the same ego energy prism or lens or filter that the higher power person is looking through to see what's really taking place when dealing with people. And they are intelligent, spiritual, imperfect, and mentally stable people just like you and me, but they've gotten caught up in the web of an abnormal world of their own making due to their unhealthy ego power energy. And they can remain stuck there until they heal the energy, leading them to the symptoms and ego stupidity that is occurring in their life. They can do this with the use of ego medicine, which consists firstly of coming to understand what ego is and isn't. Coming to understand that your ego is an energy, it's a survival energy at work in your life, similar to your heart and brain and their efforts to help you to survive. But also understanding what ego is not. That ego does not have an intellect, it doesn't have the ability to think, it doesn't have an awareness of itself, it doesn't have an awareness of you, and it doesn't have an awareness of God, something I mentioned because many of the writings about ego have often suggested that ego does think and it does not think because it doesn't have a brain to think with and to do those other things like having an awareness of yourself and of itself and of God. And also understanding that your ego doesn't form intentions for you. Your ego doesn't have a purpose involving the need to shape your life. You're the one who shapes your life, built upon the energy that's flowing into your mind. So that is the first contributor to ego medicine. The second one is being able to tune into your ego energy, meaning getting an understanding of how much ego power, how much ego flexibility, and how much ego vulnerability are operating in your life. And because that's new territory that you've never seen before, my job is to help you in that process with the books that I've written, with these podcasts, and with my website, egoandspirit.info, to give you an opportunity to tune in to just where you're at with regard to your ego energy. And then the third contributor is to replace ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts and beliefs, the ones that we created, not ego, and we replace them with ego-rooted, or we replace them with those thoughts that are connected to truth and reality, both human and divine. And that's what the next part of our program today will be about, this third contributor to ego medicine, looking at the reflections of ego stupidity for the disconnection from reality. These are the kinds of inaccurate, illogical, or irrational thoughts that people with higher ego power often bring into their efforts to interact with people. And here's the first one. Here's the first reflection. I don't need to listen to people. People with higher ego power often think the non-reality-based thought that I don't need to listen to people. And as I've shared with you earlier, their needs for control often view listening negatively because listening means I'm not in control, somebody else is. So people with higher ego power, often due to illusions of superiority and being all-knowing, have difficulty listening to other people. And this is ego stupidity that can feed into additional ego stupidity that also happens. One of them is that hearing is listening. That when you simply listen to people say words, that is listening. Well, that is not a listening. That's a non-reality-based thought, because simply hearing words doesn't mean you're really trying to get to know and understand the meanings connected to those words. So that's a non-reality-based thought. Sometimes people with higher ego power want to think they're listening and tell themselves they're listening, but they're really not. Maybe they're going on to think of their response to what the person is saying, but they're not really stopping to think about what that other person is saying. So hearing isn't listening. And that's the reality-based thought that people have to understand in working with people. Another one is that listening can only lead me to knowing the wrong things. So they devalue listening. People with higher ego power, because of their sense of knowing everything and knowing things well and needing to have control, don't want to acknowledge that they need to learn something, or that they need to learn more. So they come at listening as something that can only lead them to know the wrong things, which is a non-reality-based thought that they get caught up, that stops them from really listening to people. And one more thought that's non-reality based, I need to talk more than listen. So their needs to talk are amplified by this idea that they need to talk more than listen. And again, part of that is linked to this control need, this intense need to control. So when I'm talking, I'm controlling. When I'm listening, I'm not. And this is a non-reality based thought, because many times we need to stop to listen and not talk. When your higher ego power is healing, you begin to realize that you'll need to balance talking with listening so that you can learn more than you know and you can share control. But until then, when you're thinking that you don't need to listen to people and all of the other things I've shared with you, well, that's your ego making you stupid. Our next reflection of ego stupidity, I can make people think what I want them to think. I spoke about this earlier. People with higher ego power often think in a way they are able to engage in thought control or mind control. They can make and force people to think what they want them to think. And again, that's that ego, higher ego power, that ego blindness that just leads people into this unusual place where they think they can make other people think what they want them to think. People with higher ego power are so invested with their sense of control that leads them in this non-reality based way of looking at the way they can control other people's minds and thoughts. And this is the kind of non-reality based thinking that can lead to additional ego stupidity, which includes that people need to think what I'm thinking to be okay. There's almost this sense of justification that they're not okay now, but they can be made okay by thinking about things the way I think about them. And often that's a non-reality based thought because the higher ego power person may be thinking things that are not a good thing for people to be thinking. Another thought, I have the right to make people think what I'm thinking. And part of that is a lot of times based on the sense of entitlement. Maybe they're a quote superior person in some form of their life. Maybe they're a good athlete or an artist, or have some other form of, they've been very successful in their life, and maybe it's a financial success or vocational success, and as a result they get into this sense of having the right to make people think what they're thinking. And also, one more non-reality based thought reflective of ego stupidity, I don't need to reconsider my ideas and opinions. Meaning, I don't need to go back over what I'm saying or thinking because for many people with higher ego power, that just means that they could be wrong. And they don't want to go to that place. They don't want to go to the place of thinking they could be wrong about something that they're thinking, so they don't do that. That's a loss of control in their own way of looking at things. When your higher ego power is healing, you begin to realize that people are often less influenced by you than you think they are, particularly if they're egoically healthy people. So egoically healthy people retain control over their beliefs and their thoughts and don't succumb readily and easily to whatever the higher ego power is trying to feed them. But until then, when you're thinking that you can make people think what you want them to think and all of the rest, well, that's your ego making you stupid. We're going to look at one more reflection of ego stupidity. People don't see the way I really am. People don't see the way I really am. The higher ego power person often thinks they can control what people see about them, particularly the negative and the darker sides of who they really are. And that's an illusion. That's a non-reality based thought because people see a lot more of who they really are. People with higher ego power think people see, or that they can make them see only the good stuff while hiding the bad stuff. That they can impression manage their way out of who they truly are, so to speak. And oftentimes they don't think that there's any bad stuff to be seen, that everything is all good. And this can often lead to other illusions or other ego stupidity, such as people really love me. People really love me, which oftentimes is not the case. People may like them, or maybe they don't really like them at all because they're irritated with the way they come across and how they treat them. And also another one, non-reality basis, there really isn't anything bad for anyone to see. There isn't anything bad. There isn't anything needed to improve on or I don't need to get better at. And that's an illusion. That's a non-reality based. And also one more, I can hide the bad stuff. I can not let people see things I don't want them to see, which unfortunately is not the case because that comes through pretty well for people. Their radar for what things are about and how people are behaving allows them to see pretty much everything about who people are. When your higher ego power is healing, you begin to realize that people can see a lot more of who you really are than you think they do. And these may be the people who may eventually get around to writing the tell-all book about someone who may be famous. Until then, when you're thinking that people don't see the way you really are, And all of the rest, well, that's your ego making you stupid. Now we're going to go on to look at some specific insights connected to the symptoms of ego stupidity I've been talking about. These are insights that can help you to better see what's going on behind the scenes and beneath the surface when it comes to difficulty in our interactions with people, particularly those involving higher ego power persons. Insights intended to help you see more of your ego blindness and what ego is actually doing when it comes to difficulties. And here's the first one. Your higher ego power voice, meaning the mixture of your ego energy and mind, is preventing you from forming real relationships with real people. It's leading you into superficial, phony relationships built upon your needs for control. And it's leading you to surround yourself with yes people who will eventually leave or turn on you once you no longer serve their purposes. And it's also leading you to empty, hollow relationships in which you can never experience warm, growing relationships because they're all about you and your needs for control. When you awaken and are more conscious of your higher ego power, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. Our next insight. Your higher ego power voice is leading you to think that closeness to people is about how much you can control or influence them. There's a big connection between closeness and controlling people for people with higher ego power. And it's leading you into a faulty understanding of what trust means to a relationship. For you, trust is about controlling people or how well I can control them, rather than the ability to respect other people and share mutual trust. So it's a faulty understanding of trust and what that means to a relationship. Also, it's leading you to miss the distance that your needs for control are having on any relationship, whether it's a close relationship, it's just a family member or a close friend, or even those that are acquaintances. It's leading you to miss that distance that the control is having over on the relationship. And it's also preventing you from experiencing what it means to be in a real, genuine, respectful, and loving relationship. So you're missing all of that as a result of this need for control. When you awaken and are more conscious of your higher ego power, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. We're going to look at one more insight before we go to our next break. Your higher ego power voice, again, the blending of your ego energy with your mind, is leading you to think that you're entitled to mistreat people due to your greater ability or intellect. Again, we've talked about this earlier. People with higher ego power feel entitled to disregard people, to disrespect people. It's leading you to attack or disrespect others when they don't agree with you, when they refuse to submit to your control. And it's leading you to think people are getting what they deserve when they don't agree with you. So when they don't succumb to your control, when you're mistreating them, you feel like they deserve it because they shouldn't be doing that to you. They shouldn't be refusing to submit to the thoughts and ideas that you want to exert over them. And it's leading you to think people are disrespecting you or failing to agree with you. So this sense of they're disrespecting me because they're not going along with what I say. Again, there's that over-empowerment, that energy, that higher ego power energy that gives that distorted impression of what it means to be disrespected when people are failing to agree with you. They're not permitted to disagree with you because this is what higher ego power has led you into thinking. When you awaken and are more conscious of your higher ego power, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. We're coming up on our second break. When we return, we'll be looking at ego's impact on our spiritual wellness. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
The real conscious connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at how higher ego power can impact our spiritual wellness when it comes to getting along with people. We're looking at ego's impact on the connection, which is actually a disconnection between our humanity and our divinity. The disconnection from the God within our being, which is one of the 4 divine gifts that we've all been given. The gift of God within, that makes it possible for all of us to exist, to live. The lessening of our spiritual wellness involves gaining distance from being the love, the life, and the energy God is within our thoughts, words, and deeds, when ego is getting in the way of developing healthy relationships with people. Each of these can be undermining our spiritual wellness by distancing us from God, the God within us, our divinity. Here are some examples of ego's impact on spiritual wellness for those with higher ego power, who are failing to be their divinity when they interact with people. And we'll get started with ego's impact on being the love God is when dealing with people. We should be able to love all people, even if we know them less well. Familiarity isn't a prerequisite for loving people. People with higher ego power have difficulty being spiritually well when needs for empowerment and control over others weaken their ability to interact with people with unconditional, connective, unburdened, and unlimited love. Your divinity involves lovingly interacting with people that welcomes the opportunity to get to know each other and grow relationships, to turn people who are strangers and acquaintances into friends and possibly close friends. When your higher ego power and needs for over-empowerment are leading you to try to control others as a means to enhancing your sense of empowerment, you're not able to be the unconditional love God is. We must bring unconditional love which does not allow for controlling others within the development of healthy relationships. When your higher ego power and intense needs for empowerment are distancing you from bringing genuine love into forming relationships, you're not able to be the connective love God is. We must build relationships based on love and not control, so that the connections are strong and allow for ongoing growth of the relationship. When your higher ego power and over-empowerment are burdening you with the absence of love when interacting with people, you're not able to be the unburdened love God is. We must bring the weightlessness of love into our interpersonal experiences so they can grow in the fertile soil that love provides for their growth. When your higher power and intense needs for control over others are limiting the amount of love you can bring to meeting people, you're not able to be the unlimited love God is. The participation in social experiences with unlimited love will give them opportunity to bear fruit and enhance all who partake in them and lay the foundation for a healthy relationship. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. Next, we'll talk a little bit about ego's impact on being the life God is when interacting with people. People with higher ego power have difficulty being spiritually well when their intense needs for power, control, and influence are leading them to dishonor and disrespect others when interacting with them. Your divinity involves recognizing, honoring, and respecting others as you interact with them, so that you can respectfully participate in activities and conversations with them. When your higher ego power and intense needs for control over others are leading you to dishonor and disrespect people with arrogance, disinterest, and disregard when meeting with them, you're not being the life God is. The elimination of your intense needs for control over people will allow you to show them the respect, interest, and regard they deserve when meeting with them. When your higher ego power and over-empowerment are leading you to dishonor and disrespect others with efforts to control them during work or recreational or social occasions, you're not being the life God is. The removal of your intense needs to control people will allow you to honor and respect everyone's right to exert influence on others when it's intended to be healthy and helpful to all involved. When your higher power and over-empowerment are leading you to dishonor and disrespect people with attacks based on a false sense of your superiority and entitlement, you're not being the life God is. The ending of your intense needs for control will end these illusions so that you will no longer give yourself permission to treat people in this manner. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. Last, we'll take a look at being the energy God is and ego's impact on it when dealing with people in work, play, and social settings. This involves being able to access healing and transformative energy, which has been designed into your being to naturally occur when you're being connected to human and divine truth. This is a capacity that's 3 million years in the making, just as all of the other wondrous things that you and I have been endowed with, due to the wisdom of the ages and evolution. A capacity rooted in our common source, be it known by you as God, Allah, Yahweh, Vishnu, Great Spirit, Source, or another I have failed to mention. People with higher ego power and who are overly empowered have difficulty being spiritually well when failing to interact with people within the light of truth and understanding that can be found when they're not being consumed with needs to control people as they interact with them. Our divinity involves healing and transformation in which we are willing to interact with people by seeking the truth and understanding that can be found within us and them, when it is not being obscured and distorted by consumption to control them. It involves healing and transformation in which we are taking responsibility for seeking truth and understanding from both ourselves as well as others as we interact with them, that is unencumbered by the distortion and distance brought forth by consumption with one's needs for power, control, and influence over people. When higher ego power and intense needs for control over people is keeping you at a distance from knowing truth and understanding built on the synergy that can be found within healthy social experiences, you're not being the energy God is in working with them. The elimination of your needs to control others will open the door to deeper truth and understanding in which you can know and live more fully with those who surround you. When higher ego power and over-empowerment is keeping you from learning truth and understanding about the humanity and divinity which exists in all people, you're not being the energy God is. The elimination of your intense needs for power and control will allow you to recognize the truth of God's presence which exists in all people. When higher ego power and intense needs to control people is keeping you from knowing the truth and understanding about your divinity, you're not being the energy God is. The ending of your over-empowerment will open the door to a deeper truth and understanding of the divinity which exists within you and which can be of service to yourself and all people. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. As we leave our focus on ego's impact on our spiritual wellness, please know that we often make God and our connection to God and others so much harder than it has to be. And this is what happens when unhealthy ego energy is getting in between us. God and life and we become so much better and so much easier when we remove that obstacle with ego medicine. As we leave our focus on higher ego power and difficulty interacting with people in healthy ways, give some thought to the symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact I've shared with you. I hope what I've shared with you today will serve as a dose of ego medicine. And if any of it resonates with you, please help me to share it with others. I want to mention before leaving that you can purchase each of my books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, The Two Voices Within, and It's Your Ego Stupid, at the online bookstores for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Balboa Press. You can also purchase focused ego meditations on the shop page of my website, egoandspirit.info, which can help you to know when you are truly speaking with your voice in your life and not ego's. As you go about healing your ego energy, where needed, in its power, flexibility, or vulnerability. I end today's show with this message. The great news is that working to heal your ego energy using ego medicine by growing your awareness of its symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact will allow the divine truth in your being to flow and shine through you and allow you to fully embrace each of the divine gifts. The spiritual part of healing is a given. It's part of your endowment. Divine truth and the divine gifts are part of your heritage that already exists within you. You need do nothing more to be spiritual, because you already are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You only need to enhance your humanity with ego medicine, so that all which is available to you is given. Fix your ego to fix your life, humanly and spiritually. Thank you for listening and allowing me to be your servant. Please have a great week, and do come back to my next program. In peace and love, this is Dr. Nick saying goodbye for now.